And now we're very lucky to have Dave West, who's the CEO of Scrum.org, come up and talk about a very, very compelling topic. So he's going to come up and accept the award for Ken and for Scrum.org as well. So Dave, come on up. So without further ado, Dave West.
Hi. Hang on. Switch the device. Oh, yeah. Hi. My name's Dave. It's always interesting to get an award before you present, isn't it, really? Some would say that's like marriage, really. You know, you sort of get the big ceremony and then you have to do the hard stuff, yeah. But hopefully this isn't like marriage, or a good marriage, not a bad one, obviously. So my name's Dave. I run Scrum.org for Ken Schwaber. The reason why he's not here, actually, he really, really wanted to be here, but we are slowly replacing all physical components in the Ken Schwaber with electronics and metal. And he had a hip done last year, he had a shoulder thing, he's had a couple of other devices inserted, you don't want to know about them. And finally, he's had his ankle done. So he's just had a new ankle. It's got a USB, it's actually made by Tesla. It's really impressive. It has like a wheel, which is very annoying when your other ankle doesn't. So it goes around in circles. 2 circles, a bit like Scrum, I think. No. But anyway, so he couldn't unfortunately be here, but he sort of sent me, I guess, as a poor substitute. Now, my name's Dave. I run Scrum.org. As you may have noticed, or if you've heard me before, I have a ridiculous English accent. But I'm actually from Boston, Massachusetts, which is a city that, you know, all the great sports happen in America. So, oh dear, that was, I guess, you know, I mean, as if America has any real sports. But anyway, you know. You have baseball, it's like cricket, but less people watch it, and it's not quite as exciting. American football, you wear pads. What's all that about? No, but seriously, I have an English accent, you may have noticed. I'm also a little bit inappropriate. That's the English thing. We sort of used to have an empire, and it sort of makes you a little bit bitter. You're sort of going through that a bit yourself now, I notice. No, sorry. But seriously, so if I say anything, you know, you don't understand, tough, really. It's my language. That's how it works. But hopefully we'll have some fun in this lot of sort of keep you between you and the bar sort of moment. In England, we'd obviously already be in the bar, but, you know, so, which is good. So we're going to talk about some interesting topics. We're going to talk about really this sort of like this fundamental change. So 10 years. COHAA's been going for 10 years, right? That's pretty cool stuff. Ken came and sort of kicked off that first one 10 years ago. And those 10 years have been pretty insane. Agility is everywhere. You know, McKinsey are talking about it, and which we're going to be talking a little bit about that in a moment. Boston Consulting. You've got organizations fundamentally becoming more agile. Ford are using it, and GM are using it as an excuse to fire large amounts of people. It's very interesting, the world that we're moving to. And that's really the genesis of the work that we're going to talk about. And the reason why I suppose we can sort of talk about this a little bit is at Scrum.org, we're in a fortunate position that we get a lot of connection with the industry. Not only do, you know, myself and my team fly around the world doing some, you know, keynote speeches and getting to talk to lots of really cool people like you guys, but we also have a little bit, almost 12 million people come to our website. We train our, you know, the professional Scrum trainers, of which there's some great ones in Columbus, train about 4,000 people a month. You know, about 15,000 people take the assessments every month. The ones that fail always let us know what's wrong with everything that we're doing. So we get to interact with quite a few people. Many of them are in India, which is obviously a very long and arduous experience usually. But we end up with this sort of like lots and lots and lots of feedback. So we're sort of learning, and we've got this great community of about 250 professional Scrum trainers that really are sort of in this world every day, and they tell us even more what we're doing wrong or what's happening, etc. So that's the reason why I think I can share with some of the learning, some of the experiences that we've had. Now, whether they resonate with you or not is is up to you, and obviously most situations or every situation is slightly different. But hopefully I can share some of those as we go along. And I think that over the 10 years and over the last 2 years, we've seen something fundamentally change in the world. Remember what happened when Amazon said it was going to start distributing, pharmaceuticals or drugs? The share price of CVS, Walgreens, those organizations dropped. Literally, instantly. GE, GE is one of the most amazing organizations in the world, and their share price is just under $10 today. The world is changing rapidly. The most valuable companies in the world aren't the same as the most valuable companies 10 years ago. Sears, it's very depressing. Every mall sort of has a Sears closing down. And Sears is a fantastic organization and a fantastic brand. But even the next generation of industries are not immune of change. Facebook, if you believe Elizabeth Warren, and few do, but if you believe Elizabeth Warren, we need to break up Facebook. We need to beat up all of these techie execs, that hipsters and the like, and throw them to the wolves. They're under serious. They have to go to Congress and get asked by 80-year-old senators why their laptop doesn't work, which is also interesting. But the point is that even they are not immune for the change that we're in today. We're in a fundamentally different world than we were even 10 years ago. And in 10 years, who knows what will happen? I fortunately have a Tesla, and I don't drive on highways anymore, which is good, because I'm English and I'm, wrong side of the road, all that kind of stuff. Always drunk. But and now they've legalized pot in Massachusetts. I don't know what's happening. We need self-driving cars in Massachusetts. But the point is that this car, when you put it on auto navigate, literally weaves in and out of traffic. It's an elegant experience until something goes wrong, and then you drop your coffee because it tells you to start driving, and you're like, oh my God, I've forgotten how to. But the point is that in 10 years, it's very likely that definitely across America on the freeways, not necessarily in the cities, you'll get a lot of self-driving cars. The fact that the post office, UPS, is now, they're rolling that out to move move mail across the country. The world is changing every day. I was at a company that does gene therapy, CRISP it's called. And I was talking to them, and they're talking about how they can genetically cure blindness. Blindness. Hemophilia there's another company called Unicor that's got something that's in clinical trials at the moment, in a final stage of clinical trials, that's going to cure hemophilia, the really bad C one. It's incredible that you can manipulate the genetic makeup of a human being. Now, maybe there's lots of moral questions about superheroes and, everybody's going to be English. I don't know. Bad teeth, But the point is, it's really, really interesting. We live in an incredibly exciting time. I think there's a lot of opportunity. Any problem that we have today, we can solve if we decide we want to do it. Unfortunately, if we look at most organizations, our ability to do that is kind of inhibited, and we'll talk more about that later. There's a great book I recommend, that Ken recommends, that sort of like distills this. It's a New York Times, Washington Post author, Thomas Friedman. He wrote a book called Thank You for Being Late, this one, and then he wrote another book called The World is Flat. And he talks about these three things: the market, digital globalization, Mother Nature. England now has snow and summers, very unusual. I grew up in a exactly the same temperature, always gray world, and now it's completely different. But what's more interesting about climate change, well, one of the many things, is population movement. The fact that we're seeing mass movements of people because of the environment, because of famine, et cetera, particularly in Africa, but also in northern India and then places in China. So that's changing where consumers are, that's changing where jobs are, that's changing everything about the situation in those markets and in those economies, changing the opportunities. Moore's law obviously goes without saying. We all know that technology is exponentially growing. The fact, if you watch Tesla, I'm sort of a bit of a geek when it comes to Tesla, and that neural network chip that they created, really, really interesting. Trillions of transactions a minute that it's processing on multi-threaded quantum kind of computing kind of mechanisms. Really, really interesting technology that's going ahead. Thomas Friedman also wrote a book, which is also kind of interesting, which talks more to what I'm going to be talking about, which is That Used to Be Us. With the title is basically The Demise of America, so it's kind of like, oh my God, it's going to be depressing. But it's actually not. It's a really optimistic view of America and the future of America. And one thing that he describes in it, which I think, which is sort of missed in a lot of the work, he does mention it briefly in this one, is this idea that work is changing to be creators. You know, that as we move from the industrial age to this modern age, digital age, where the roles and the responsibilities are changing to something to creators. And another person that writes about this is an economist called Khalida Perez. She's a Venezuelan, but she lives in London. She's spectacular. Her book, though, unfortunately, is if you suffer from insomnia, I would recommend it. She's an economist. And you're like, God, that's hard, you know. As opposed to my books, which my grandmother described my last, not the last one, but the one before that, as the best book she's ever owned for killing spiders. I asked the publisher whether they'd put that on it. They said, no, we're not going to put that quote, unfortunately. But anyway, so Khalida, I wouldn't necessarily recommend her book, even though it's fabulous, unless in fact, many of you are super smart or you've got an economics degree or whatever, and read it then, but I found it incredibly hard going. But her blogs and she's written some really good blogs around the 5 ages, and we're in the 5th age now. And she describes this sort of movement from the age of mass production to this digital age. Many of you are having challenges in your day-to-day life, right? At work, not socially and, you know, romantically and all that, but I mean, that's a whole different thing. But in your work, it's hard doing Agile, right? It's hard bringing it into the organizations. It's hard. There's a lot of friction that you're seeing. That friction ultimately can be connected to the transition from the age of mass production to the digital age. So the age of mass production is all about scarcity. It's all about efficiency. It's all about minimizing risk. It's all about process. It's all about management. The digital age is something different. And that is the fundamental challenge that we're facing. Now, unfortunately, Khalida writes about this a lot, about previous times when we've gone through this. Most of the other times in the other 4 ages, obviously in the 5th now, what happens is mass death, usually, as we move into these ages. Whether it's, you know, Napoleonic Wars. Have you ever seen Le Miserable? There's a really good PBS version of it at the moment with the guy that was in that. The Affair. Anyway, that's really good. Recommend that. Les Miserables, you have to sell your hair. As you can see, that would not be particularly effective on mine unless back hair was particularly of a premium. That was a little bit too much sharing, wasn't it? Sorry. Why does it start on your head and then suddenly move its way into places you don't want it to go? I think it's just really unfair. One of life's ironies. But the point is, though, that we're sort of transitioning to this age, and it's usually when you go through this transition, it's an incredibly painful time. You know, whether it's, some would argue that the Civil War was because of these transitions in labor and the need for it and the like. Some would say that the wars in general, many wars have been born because of this. So we're in this sort of like fundamental change at the moment. And you can see some of the characteristics have changed. You know, long-term, short-term planning, you know, short-term profit, long-term value, efficiency, innovation opportunity, specialization of labor versus cross-functional teams, process control, self-organization and decentralization. Management is king. Management isn't king anymore. The creator is king. Now, that sounds like some sort of millennial thing, I know, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is, ultimately, the most valuable assets in your organizations are not the people that manage all the other people. It's the people that deliver value to customers. And the most successful organizations are the ones that have aligned those people in the most efficient way with the minimum of dependencies to those value centers, to those value streams. That's the future. It's the simplest thing conceptually to do, but often the hardest thing to actually deliver on, unfortunately. So we're in this sort of like different age. And that means that we're entering from the age of scarcity. This is a McKinsey concept, which I really quite like, to this age of abundance. The fact that I've got a website that 12 million people may come to this year. I say may come to because suddenly, nobody comes in the, last part of the year. But say 12 million people come to this website. It costs me about $1,200 a month running on AWS. It runs as fast in India as it runs in London, as it runs in America. Isn't that interesting? It's $1,200. I can do some amazing things rapidly, quickly, and easily. SpaceX, great example. SpaceX, their core engineering team that basically launches the rockets, does the stuff, lands them randomly on boats and all that kind of really cool stuff because landing them anywhere else would be far too easy. And guess how many engineers, software engineers they have in that team? 34. I love it because I go to insurance companies, their claims department, people working on their claim systems are like 5,000. So they're rocket scientists, and you have to pay a few car claims. Well, yeah, it's really complicated stuff. It's not rocket science, mate. Yeah, that's why we need so many people. Anyway, and just to compare, NASA had about 5,000 people doing the same work. Now, of course, it's not literally exactly the same, and there's all sorts of different, elements to it. The shuttle program was a lot more complicated in lots of elements. It had there was all sorts of other things. So it's not horses for course, it's not exactly the same, but it's illustrative of the fact that we live in a world where, you can do some amazing things at incredible speed. The world of abundance. Another way to think about this is to think a little, sort of like we're going from this age of this model of factories, this metaphor around factories, to this idea that we're building these little organic teams or teams of teams that are aligned to the environment they're in, the customer they're focused on, the value stream that they're focused on, and they morph and change depending on the needs of that particular customer. Maybe that customer needs distribution. Maybe that then needs more sales. Maybe it needs, and we're continuously evolving as we understand our customer, as we get more data about the customer, as we are better at predicting that customer's behavior. That could be an internal customer, it could be an external customer, it doesn't really matter. It could be a subsystem or a service as part of a broader value chain in a car or a plane or a spaceship. But ultimately, it's that kind of model that we need to start thinking about. And ultimately, the role of management is no longer to facilitate and to tell people how to better or more efficiently manage the resources and deliver the value ultimately and glue all this mess together. The value of management or the role of management is really to provide the environment that allows these things to be more effective. In Scrum terms, they take impediments and resolve them, or help the teams that resolve impediments. They deal with sort of like contradictions, like around incentives or all those sort of things, bonuses or whatever. They provide more people, with skills, rather, whether it's guilds or chapters or communities. Whatever those things are, that's what they do. So that's the world we're moving to. And that has huge implications on the future of work. Huge implications to the future of work. Implications that, unfortunately, governments and organizations seem to have an inability to think about or deal with. Our education system is based on the mass production age, right? Our value system around education is about individuals. We don't know if somebody can work as a team unless maybe they play sport, which is a very different value proposition, particularly American sports, than if they can work delivering creativity or working in a truly innovative way. So a lot of people are writing about this now, right? The Economist, obviously, that's where everybody goes because it's an English magazine that talks about all sorts of really grown-up things in a very boring way, using words that you're like, really? Is that a word? But they're talking about it. And then you've got, obviously, a little bit more lowbrow, the American Business Week. And then something in the middle, a New York Times, who knows what they're doing. But the point is that you've got all of these organizations effectively talking about this now. This is really, really interesting, but unfortunately, they don't seem to be able to act on it. There's a lot of great STEM projects, there's lots of great charities doing some interesting stuff, but it's really an interesting set of problems that we have around it. Now, there's two kind of views that I will share with you, and then we're going to go into the research that we did with McKinsey that sort of questions some of these personality traits, and I'll come to this. One is from Davos, the World Economic Forum, their view of, they call it 2020. Now, unfortunately, it took them 3 years to publish it, and by then it was like, well, that's only like 2 years away, but we'll ignore that. They talk about complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity. They talk about people-centric organizations. They talk about basically working with others. I love the fact they called it coordinating with others, which is the stupidest way of describing it. But anyway, EQ, or emotional intelligence, judgment, and compromise. They talk about, basically delivering value and servicing those relationships in a more effective way. Negotiation, flexibility or plasticity, the ability to change, the fact that you may change depending on the situation around it. Now, the Singularity University obviously is the singularity is coming kind of guys. These are a bit more crazy than Davos. Critical thinking, problem solving, collaborative across networks. Networks are really important. One thing that's really, really super interesting in all the organizations that we see that are doing a really good job in this new age is that people help others. Now, that might sound like, well, obviously, I always help others. Really? Do you? How much time are you giving to mentoring? How much time are you coaching? How much time are you helping others deal with their challenges? People often ask me, which framework should you use to scale Agile, right? I don't think any of the frameworks, or all the frameworks. It's not a framework question. It's a people question. The way that you scale Agile is getting people that understand the concepts and the ideas to help others that maybe not. And then you create an environment that helps them be successful. Get out of their way. That's how you scale Agile. You don't use SAFe or LESS or DAD or Nexus or any of these things. They're great tools, but ultimately it's about the people. So what's really interesting is building those networks of skills. Obviously, Spotify have a very formal way of doing it, which is kind of interesting and kind of cool. But there's different ways of creating these networks. I'm hoping, as I look around this room over the last 10 years, you guys are building this network. One of the most interesting things about coming back to this location and thinking, wish my students' union was like this. How many people do that? You're like, wow, this is fabulous. Is that I see the same faces. And you're like chatting with your mates and, oh yeah, I'm working here now and this is what I'm doing. That's so, so important. Agility, adaptability, obviously, well, I'm obviously a big fan of that. Interestingly, the Agile Manifesto must be called the Adaptive Manifesto. Martin Fowler really wanted it to be called Adaptive, and everybody else said it's too many letters. And that was the end of that. And I think Alistair Coburn said, I don't like TIV, which I have no idea why he would say that, but anyway, but that's Alistair, right? Entrepreneurship. We talk about the product owner being an entrepreneur, this person that's like trying to drive value in sort of crazy-ass ways. We have to communicate. Communication is so, so important, but so hard. My gran always used to say to me, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, Dave, use them like that. I didn't really listen to her, but the bottom line is we're really bad at communicating. We need to be better at communicating. We're really good at talking. I'm a professional talker. I'm a crap communicator. Assessing, analyzing information, obviously data, and curiosity and imagination. Curiosity and imagination. We're building teams of curious. The art of the possible, right? We can do anything. You guys can do anything. We just need to try it and get going and try it and learn about it. Now, ultimately, that sort of drives us to a different way of thinking about the types of work that we're focused on. This is Cynefin framework. That's Welsh. So I'd like to officially say I'm describing a really good thing that's Welsh, which makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. But there's a whole English-Welsh thing. It's like you and Canada. Are they going to get in the NBA thingy? Their basketball? That's going to be odd, isn't it? Anyway, it's interesting that the work that we're moving to is less about complicated and simple and more about complicated and complex. The simple work is being replaced. Lawyers, right? Lawyers, when you become a lawyer, the first 3 years or 2 years of your life, you spend a lot of time document and analyzing. You have these rooms of people analyzing documents and that. Computers can do that so much better. They really can. 80% of the code at Google is written by computer now. Now, it's not the creative code, it's the test harnesses and all that kind of stuff. So it's a volume rather than a complexity sort of measure. But what's interesting is that work is going away. I was with John Deere last week in Detroit, And they were telling me about lots of things, but one of the things, they had T-shirts and everything. The one thing that they were telling me about was the complexity of planting seeds. Who knew? They have these really amazing machines that a human basically sits in his truck, presses the button, and it goes and optimizes, analyzes the soil, uses infrared lights, and puts a bit of water. It's amazing. Now, that used to be groups of people doing it, right? It used to be farmers. Now there's a guy sitting in a truck, writing a bit of code, pressing a button, looking at all sorts of interesting pieces of data. We're moving to a world where complexity, all the work that really is going to be complex work. And that means a different type, not only the way we work, but maybe a different type of set of skills or a different type of person. And fundamentally, that drove the research that I'm going to talk about, even though it took me an hour to get there. The research that we did with McKinsey was really focused on a very interesting question. McKinsey are writing a lot more around agility. They're writing some really interesting stuff. I don't agree with all of it, but it is good stuff. They're definitely driving organizations at that C level to think about how they work, how they organize, how they structure, how they incentivize, how they fund the future of work. So because of that, we asked a very simple question, or they had a very simple question that they asked me and we started working on together. They asked a very simple question. Is everybody right for Agile? Is there a certain type of person that is more natural for this future, this new world? And what are those characteristics that we need to think about? So we embarked on this research agenda together. And we did some, sort of interesting observation. The first thing that we did was we interviewed a bunch of people and asked them, what are the most important characteristics of Agile team members and product owners? We left the Scrum Master out because we were mostly talking to Scrum Masters. So we're like, asking them about themselves is self-serving. They'd say, oh, I don't know, height. I don't know, whatever their particular ginger hair, I don't know, one leg, and happens to be a one-legged Scrum Master. No, but the point is, a pirate Scrum Master, wouldn't that be cool? Anyway, but the point is that we asked this, and we found these were the sort of like high-level things that the traits were. They believed ability to handle ambiguity, which is incredibly hard to say when you've been drinking all day. But handle ambiguity. Now, ambiguity is something that we try to avoid, right? Ambiguity is that sort of like that uncomfortable, difficult thing that we have to accept, but we don't mention it. There's always the elephant in the room. We have to be able to handle that. We have to be more focused on getting stuff out rather than the process to getting there. So it's like the result we're interested in, not the working to get to that result. And we need to be more focused on teams, which is an interesting sort of characteristic. There was also other words that were used: growth mindset, open, alert, lots of life, supportive, lots of life again over there. So it was kind of interesting what we saw. So we then decided to really look at two things: personality traits. What are the personality traits of the accompanying personality traits that would be considered to be important, and what are the work values that would support these three things: these ability to handle ambiguity, outcome versus process orientation, and this team sort of thing. And we found this. So we started with the big five. So this is any personality test in the last 30 years has concentrated on these sort of like 5 things. Now we added one just because we wanted to really capture that ambiguity question. So we, handles ambiguity, agreeableness, extroversion, being an extrovert, warm, gracious, assertive, enthusiastic, actively seeking, that sort of always questioning. Conscientious, openness, neurotic, which is anxious, hostile, always think everybody's the enemy, all that kind of stuff. So this is the 5-factor model, the big 5, also known as the ocean model. I have no idea why it's called the ocean model. I'm not I'm sure Chris would probably know. Christopher would know better than I because he's in this sort of field. But anyway, so there was this. These were these big 5 things, right? So we executed a survey, very detailed personality surveys, where we found what people were, but also what they thought was the best sort of characteristics for an Agile team. What characteristics define that? And we found some interesting things. Obviously, no surprise, it was sort of self-fulfilling. And yes, you're right, it was quite a heavy survey, so the sample size is relatively small. What we're doing next is we're going to scale this, which we'll talk about at the end. But handles ambiguity, no surprise. Agreeableness, we'll come back to that. Extroversion was interesting, because most of the Agile teams I work on, we seem to spend our entire time trying to turn everybody into an extrovert. Oh, let's do one of those, sort of the things where we all hold hands and get tied up. You know that one? Or is that just me at weekends? I don't know. Oh, come on, everybody likes a bit of tying up. You haven't got handcuffs? What kind of life are you living? Anyway, very hard to explain to your children, though. It's fine, we're just playing. Really? Anyway, but sorry, I don't know why. Anyway, it is the afternoon, after the watershed. So interestingly, that extroversion was very, very kind of, product owners need to have it, but team members don't, and that was interesting unto itself. Conscientiousness, that was surprising. Openness, we'll come back to conscientiousness and openness, because that was a real surprise to me. And then, no surprise, this sort of like very individual-focused, neuroticism, this everybody's against us, everybody's going to beat us, I've got to look after myself, protect that, is that. Now, what's interesting is we've built our entire education system and our entire reward system to reward that, which is another problem which we'll come to in a minute. So let's start and talk a little bit about what I was a little surprised by this. Excuse me. So agreeableness, I've always assumed, wasn't a particularly nice trait. It's one of those yes men, right? It's one of those geezers that always says yes, yes, It's one of those guys that never has an opinion, right? But actually, because we did a real grown-up, like we had proper data scientists and psychologists and stuff doing this with us from McKinsey, they've got everybody. They asked lots of different questions to get to this. And what was interesting is trusting, appreciative, straightforward, focused on others rather than themselves, kind. Kind is such an important trait. Kind is perhaps one of the most important things that we can develop. Do you know the reason why kind is so important? Because it creates trust. It creates psychological safety. A lot of the challenges that we have about transparency around empiricism is because people aren't kind. So you're always a little bit concerned. It's interesting. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and when my 6-year-old is playing soccer, there's a kid called Henry. His dad's English, so he's really into football. Liverpool fan, though, so I don't totally trust him. And, Liverpool, what are they? Anyway, though they may win the European Cup, but anyway, who knows? Anyway, so he's a Liverpool fan. And so Henry and George, now my son is 4'2" at 6. He's a little bit, his legs have outgrown his ability to use them. And so he plays soccer a bit like the American national team, He has effort, he's attractive, but yeah, doesn't kind of score. Perfect teeth. But yeah, so Henry shouts to him, "George, where were you?" And George says, "I was trying, Henry." And guess what? George is like, "Mum," my wife happens to be the coach, "Mum, I want to go off." And he's the last, and you can see him sort of like wait as the ball goes up, because he's like, if I'm not there, Henry won't shout at me. Kindness, right? Now, Henry, he's 6, so I'm not blaming Henry. Henry's a lovely little boy, and he's a really good soccer player. But the point is, we do that in our teams all the time. We might not do it directly. It's called sarcasm, right? It's called irony. It's called lad culture. It's called Silicon Valley culture. If somebody says, "Hey, I don't understand this," or "You bloody idiot," of course you got it. So you just don't admit it. You keep your head down, right? That's the best way. We need to create that kind of environment. Agreeableness isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing. Now, interestingly, as we did this research, because, McKinsey, super smart people that read lots, they pointed me at this project that Google did around high-performance teams. Some of you may be familiar with it. Now, I want to call it Archimedes, but I think it was called Project Aristotle, but, some Greek geezer. And what they found was over and over again that the most important thing, one of the most important characteristics of a high-performance team wasn't that they're the smartest, they're MIT, Yale, Caltech, whatever, but they had an environment that was psychologically safe, safety. It was agreeable environment. People liked each other, were kind to each other. They were in it together. There was many other characteristics and other things that we can talk about as well. Yes and, not yes but. Yes and, not yes but. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking to yourself, Nas, I'm lovely. I'm super kind. And maybe you are. But could you be kinder? Could you help that person? Could you encourage them to share more? Could you be supportive, a little bit more supportive? Could you be a little less boombastic? I don't know. I don't know your situations. But what I do know is I could. And we are always striving in our community, in our PST community, to build a kind environment. We have new PSTs come in, and it's very easy to be like, oh, what did you, oh. It's like when one of our PSTs was in a Volvo dealer, and he said, oh, he took a photo of the board and said, hey, they even use Kanban in the Volvo dealer. And of course, one of our PSTs responded with, that's not a Kanban board. A Kanban board has these 5 characteristics, etc. Guess what? That PST did not send another thing on the list. Now, that PST could have said something really interesting in another moment that could have inspired a really intelligent conversation. Now, was that the person that responded to him wrong? No, he's totally right. It's important to have WIP limits. It's important to visualize them, all that kind of stuff. All those things are right, but there could have been a really nice way to describe it. Or maybe a private conversation, opportunity for a bit of training, instead of insulting him in a way that brought him down. Yes and, not yes but. Agreeableness is surprisingly important. Kindness is really, really important, and something we have to monitor. It's not something that we're naturally, and you might say, I'm just having a laugh. Yeah, you're the only one laughing, mate. You're the only one laughing. God, that got a bit deep, didn't it? I didn't mean to go there, right? Now, we're in the Midwest, so everybody's super kind here. On the East Coast, oh my God, it's a shit show. When I deliver this in Canada, they go, yeah, but, because obviously they're all super nice. So we have to be more Canadian. So I'm going to buy a little outfit, a hat and a Mounties thing, big trousers. It's going to be great. Anyway, so agreeableness, fair enough. We talked about that, we all have to be Canadian. It's all going to be okay. This is interesting. Conscientiousness and openness. Now, I thought this was wrong. I was like, no, this is weird. And to be honest, we're not totally sure why this happened, but maybe. So, interestingly, there's a word in the Scrum values. The Scrum values, there's things that were added a few years ago, but they were in, then they were out, then they're back in. So, commitment. Now, commitment is often misunderstood in the Scrum values. People think of it as, oh my God, I'm sprint planning, I'm committing to these PBIs in the sprint. I've done the estimate, I'm committed. That's what I'm doing. And if I muck it up, I'm going to get into trouble because I'm committed. So I'll work every hour possible to do that. That's not what commitment means. What commitment means in the Scrum values is it means that I'm committed to my team, I'm committed to doing that, believing in the process. I'm committed I'm committed to do empiricism. I'm committed to make things transparent. I'm committed to Scrum, and then what will be will be. But it's a forecast, it's not an absolute. We'll see where that goes, but I'm committed to bloody try. So conscientiousness, achievement, striving, self-discipline, and is an interesting set of characteristics around that describe that sort of behavior, that sort of desire to actually do it. And not just talk about it, but actually do it. So maybe that is what we're finding there. We're going to have to do more research on this. Openness, though, was a real surprise. And this isn't absolute, but it looks to me like we're not. the curiosity, imaginative, insightful are less important than the other characteristics. Now, that might be just merely a description of the fact that, yes, you need to have those things, but they're not as important for agility. They're important to deliver fantastic products. They're important to ask the right questions, but it may be how we worded the question. So we still need to do some research, and as I'll talk briefly about the work we're going to do next to increase the sample size and to look a little bit more in detail on that. So we did some research around personality traits. You know, we sort of did our Cosmo survey. You know those Cosmo surveys, what man should you date or whatever? I don't know if you've done those, but I always found it was a sailor or a fireman. I can't remember, one of those two. Anyway, which my wife tries to enact. Yeah. But so here's the rub. Let's take those, let's translate that into hiring characteristics. So the ideal product owner and team member is somebody that's agreeable, higher agreeable than national average. So if you get like 10 geezers in a room and you ask them all agreeable questions, there's actually lots of details behind this that you can read on either the McKinsey site or the scrum.org site. But if you get 10 people in a room, you will find that there won't be that many of them that are agreeable because the national average is a little bit less than that. So really focus on trying to find people that are yes and, not yes but. People that people that are kind by nature. Focus on that sort of stuff. What's important for product owners, though, is extrovertedness. Now, what's interesting about that isn't that, we have to look for the ultimate extrovert to be a great product owner. But remember what their job is. Their job isn't writing requirements. Their job isn't doing user stories and acceptance criteria, though they may do some of that. That isn't their job. Their job is to define value, to set value, and work with the team to ensure that that value is delivered in the most economic and effective way. Their job is to deliver value. Now, the only way they can do that is to work with other people. Customers are a great example of that, right? Stakeholders, people that pay for the stuff, investors. That probably means they have to like people a little bit. That probably means that they probably need some of those characteristics. Now, of course, there are certain products where you don't have to like people, probably, and now you don't have to have that trait. I'm trying to think of one, but I'm sure there is one or two. Maybe guns. Maybe that's a great. If you're a product owner for guns, you probably have to hate people, right? Look at how many I can kill. But I don't know. Sorry, this is America. I apologize for mentioning guns. We don't have guns in England. We outlawed them, and we give our policemen big sticks and silly hats. You could learn a lot from that. You try running from a guy with a silly hat and not laughing. Yeah, drop it. You got a silly hat. You laugh, he catches you. It's great. Anyway. Yeah, you wonder why they still use those. Don't you have trouble indoors? We used to have a rule for the Metropolitan Police Force, had to be all over 6 foot. So you can imagine with their hats, they must have spent a lot of time knocking them off walking through doors. Anyway, sorry, but I digress. So extroversion is important and something we need to look into for product owners, not for team members. They can be as introverted as you like. No, they can be whatever they be, but ultimately it's less important. So, all right, so let's, and if you really want, there's a lot of great questions that we put together to sort of identify some of those traits. It's in the research paper. So then we looked at work values, and we used a classic model. This is some classic model for work values, where we added a couple of things. We added pride in product, and customer centricity, but the others are sort of standard kind of models. So pride in product, they care about the product, openness to change, customer centricity, self-transcendent, I don't quite know what that really means, other than interested in others, I think, cares about the world around them and all that, as opposed to the opposite, and then order, this sort of conservatism or whatever you want to call it, resistance to change, etc. And no real surprises there. I mean, the sort of the interesting openness to change and customer centricity is interesting. This sort of like this desire your ability to change. Team members need to have more desire to change than product owners. That's probably good, because ultimately the product owners that I know that are really good at their job tend to have that passion and vision that's actually a little bit insane. I've worked with a number of fabulous product owners in my life, and they kind of have this vision that could be very wrong. And even though all the data is pointing to the fact that it's wrong, they aren't prepared to change that vision. They have that sort of belief. The Steve Jobs, we need to move to a model more like Microsoft. No, we don't. We need to continually change our products and use lots of dongles. Yeah, okay, that's great. Why don't we just use a standard format? No, we have to do it completely different. But that vision ultimately proved correct. It could have easily proved very, very, very wrong. Elon Musk is a great example. He doesn't necessarily change his mind very often. He is the Willy Wonka of the 21st century. And he's sort of got that sort of passion, not for chocolate, but for everything, sort of everything. Spaceships, holes, flamethrowers, you name it. Anyway, so yeah, that's sort of interesting around openness to change, customer centricity. It is true. Now, I'm a little bit disappointed about that. I think the best agile teams, everybody is focused on the customer. And in fact, the most, autonomy, mastery, purpose, that sort of Dan Pink stuff. I love when purpose is shared by everybody. It's so, so important. And it's so motivating. I've got time. Yeah, I got time to tell a really interesting story. So you can decide whether it's interesting. I'll tell it nonetheless. I was speaking at a pharmaceutical company, a big pharma, and I was speaking to their sales and marketing organization as a move to Agile. They're German. Yeah. And so, they don't laugh at any jokes. They're like, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to go and talk to a bunch of sales and I don't even know what sales and marketing for big pharma is, isn't it? That's like, sell more pills, have bigger pots, isn't that? That's how Oxycontin worked. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk to them because it's a mate of mine that's doing it, so I'm going to do this talk. So we had this event. It was at a university, actually, similar to this. It was Babson, which is a beautiful college, much smaller room, and no football stadium. We just do school stuff there. I don't know. Anyway, so we were in Babson, and I was like, and so I was the second one on. There was this customer advocate before me. I was like, I don't know what that is. Anyway, so I'm sitting there, and they do a drug for multiple sclerosis, and turns out it's an awful, awful disease. And what was really interesting is that the lady that came on before is stage 4, is very severe multiple sclerosis. And they have a product that looks a bit like Facebook, but for people that are on their protocol and like to allow them to answer questions and all that kind of stuff. It looks a bit like Facebook for multiple sclerosis sufferers. So I'm starting to hear a bit about this product. I'm listening to this talk, and this lady comes on and tells a story about 3 a.m. in the morning when she was in severe pain. Apparently that happens. And she was suicidal. And she tells this story about how the portal, this Facebook sort of knockoff, helped her deal with it. She went on to look for pain medicine, would oxycodone affect it, whatever, all this kind of stuff. And she found somebody else online. They have a sort of chat thing. And they chatted. And they chatted for about an hour. And it basically talked her off the ledge. Oh my God, people were crying. It was like amazing. She was really, really emotional, very true heart sort of stuff. Oh my God. And I mean, when I came on, imagine following that as well. That was great. I'm like, hi, I want to talk about Agile now. And people were like still exhausted and everybody was crying and I was crying. It was like, but you know what was really cool about that? I mean, obviously it's awful that she has MS, an awful situation and an awful world, but it was amazing because the team that was there, can you imagine how proud they felt of their product? Imagine how connected they felt to that customer. Imagine that the person that put that feature in that allowed you to find other people online, ask a question, it's this sort of like question thing. Imagine what they felt like. Customers are the most important. The reason why we added a professional scrum with UX working with Jeff and Josh from the Lean UX community was because the ability to get everybody to understand the customer, personas, empathy maps, those things are super important. I was a little disappointed that wasn't a higher thing in this, because I think it's super, super important. Super, super important. So what did the work value stuff tell us? So the work value stuff told us that pride in product, customer centricity for a product owner, no problem. Pride in product, openness to change for a team member. Not a real surprise there. Pride in product, though. One of the biggest disasters with the project culture is the lack of alignment to long-term alignment to products or to outcomes or to customers. The fact that resources are fungible, that you move them from one project to another, the fact that you have no direct alignment, the fact that you are a back-end Java developer, or a database person, or a UX person, or 1 minute you'll be working on this project, 1 minute you'll be working on this project. In fact, we like projects so much you're on 10. Now, it's really hard to be proud of something that you're not involved in consistently. It's really hard to be proud of something where you've not got that synergy. It's so bad. Look, everybody left then. You're like, yeah, you're right. I'm going to go out and resign. But I hope, no, please don't. That would be really disastrous for me. But the point is that pride in product is super, super important to be effective. And we need to create an environment that allows that to happen. It used to be when I left university in the 90s and went to work for a commercial union, an insurance company in the UK, I was a Adabas Natural COBOL developer. I was a level 2 Adabas Natural COBOL developer. I didn't mention insurance unless somebody was really boring me, because I didn't have any connection to that. I literally got a PCR, program change request. I, read it, downloaded the code that was necessary, wrote that code, did my unit testing, fingers crossed there, mate, and then gave it to somebody to desk check. We did that over beers, usually, or cigarettes. Remember, you could smoke in the office. It was England. There was a guy who used to have to smoke a pipe. How annoying was he? Anyway, and it's interesting to think about. Anyway, and then you'd hand it, you'd get all your things, somebody would sign it off, you'd check it in, and that's it. Another PCR would appear, and you'd start working. And I had zero pride in my products. Zero. I cared about my craft, kind of. I cared about, the work I did. I liked to be good. I didn't want my mates to, when they did the desk check-in, to realize I'd spelt, something wrong, like read with a Y or something. I'd rather it compiled. But I didn't have any pride in the actual product that I was delivering. And that showed, right? That showed. RP150, which was the big thing that we used to write code that fitted into this big thing, used to run every night and used to fail frequently. And yes, there was a bunch of old geezers that knew how it worked, but they were level 3s and level 4s, right? They just did. That has to change. We have to take ownership, take control. No more excuses. We have to own the things, but that's only possible if we're aligned to those things. So that's a really key characteristic. So the ideal team member is more open to change than the national average. The ideal product owner and team member value conservatism less than the average. So we're looking for people that like change. We're looking for people that accept that they're going to really change those norms. We're looking for people that are proud of the products that they work on. They're the kind of people that we need. So, all right, so what does that all mean? I don't really know. It's sort of complicated, isn't it, really? Motivation, values, outcomes, customer value, and value is that big sort of story that they care about. In the case of that that pharmaceutical company, they care about the customer. They sort of have that empathy to that customer. They want to learn those stories. They're interested in the customer. So what gets you excited? What are you interested in? If you're really interested in autonomous, you've got drones at home, and you drive electric cars, and you've got a robot that cleans the cat hair up. Maybe you're maybe automotive. Maybe you're interested in the future of transportation. Maybe If money was not a delimiter, if you had as many, what would you do? What would you guys do? What would you do? And that's a really interesting thing. Motivation is crucial. How do you help others? Support. Do you care about others? Do you value teams? Tell me a story about how you value working with others and when you help somebody do something. It doesn't have to be about work. It could be, your church, or it could be, scouts or whatever. Tell me a little bit about mentoring. Tell me the value of mentoring. Mentoring's hard as well. Very, very hard. When did someone last help you? And how did that feel? Give me an example of where you got stuck and you asked for help. These are kinds of interview questions that we need to start thinking about. These are kind of questions that we need to be asking ourselves to be better at working in this complex world. Do you care about a customer? Tell me a little bit about the pains. What sort of pains do you think they have? What are the challenges do you think they have? How did that MS customer, why would you guess they would need? Trying to get that empathy is important. How would you measure our success? If we do this well, how would you measure our success? These are sorts of things that we need to think about. And pride, caring about the work you're doing, feeling honestly excited about the job. Describe something you're proud of. It's an interesting interview question. Something you're proud of. Don't say your kids. Well, you can. I'm proud of my kids. Tell me something from a work context that you're proud of doing. Can any of you think of something you're proud of? I'm sure you all can. But they're the kind of thoughts that we need to start thinking about when we're looking at the characteristics they're interested in. Describe something when you were disappointed. That's an interesting reflection as well. Because many times the environment doesn't necessarily let us deliver on the value that we would want. And disappointment is a good indicator of what really makes us tick. As I said, in the research, we've got a really detailed, sort of a very McKinsey detailed sort of analysis of it all and the sort of questions. And these are just ideas, but they're interesting. Hang on a minute. I can see some of you, the cynics in you, we sort of like mind police, just like mental recognition, a bit like facial recognition. Are we only expecting a certain set of people can work in this new world? What are we going to do with the rest? We're not going to have the Napoleonic Wars again, unless Napoleon appears, which would be very odd and surprising. Though he was in Bill and Ted, wasn't he, as I recall? But are we expecting that? Is it 1984, where everybody has to think the same? No. All of this stuff can change. All of this stuff is us. We have the ability to change ourselves. We're amazingly adaptive. That's the reason why the human race has been so successful. If we know these things are important, we can start driving those behaviors. There's a role in Scrum that you may have heard of called the Scrum Master. Why isn't it called Agile Coach? Yeah, whatever. That role is super important for driving this change. Now, they may not have all the skills to do this, to help you on this journey. They may have to use mindfulness coaches. They may have to pull in, send you on classes. But ultimately, we can change this behavior. I was asked to, there was this, so I'm sort of starting to read a little bit about Buddhism at the moment. And whenever I say that, they go, well, you've got the haircut. Yeah, so I found a Buddhist sort of thing that didn't have baldness. But to quote another bald chap, thought manifests as the word, right? Agreeableness. The word manifests as a deed, yes, and. The deed develops into a habit. We're kind, we're respectful. We help people. We listen to them instead of trying to tell them all the time. And the habit hardens into a character. We can change our behaviors to respond in this different way. Because ultimately, to solve these amazingly complex problems requires us to work as teams. So CRISP is a great example. So CRISP are going to solve many of the genetic ailments that that really do plague our babies, right? They're born with a particular DNA mix that means that certain things happen, whether it's blindness or whatever. They're going to solve that. But you know how? It's not just biologists or geneticists. It's big data analysts. It's computer scientists. It's mathematicians. It's physicists, because of all that quantum stuff, which I don't really understand. It's a collection of cross-functional collection of people working together to deliver value. They can't do it on their own. The most exciting changes in the future are cross-discipline teams, right? To do that, we have to work more effectively together. That means we have to think differently about how we work, which is interesting. Oh my God, I used to be a software engineer. Look at me, now I'm some sort of new age preacher. It's kind of getting embarrassing, and I'm going to have to go and beat myself later. Yeah, what the heck? This is the first time I've delivered this presentation, so it got a little bit hippie for a moment. So let's bring it back for a sec and get all sensible. Agile ain't, as much as we would like, obviously you have to do Scrum. Damn it. But change, it's not just about changing organizational models, adding the Spotify model, doing SAFe, doing Scrum, doing Kanban, doing TDD, doing BDD. All those things are awesome. They're all amazing. Using Jira. It's not those things, even though we've got to live a bit of Jira. It's about changing how we think and approach the world. And that means we have to think about the personality traits that we, for many years, through education, through socialization, through the way in which you see coaches and basketball teams shouting at their players. How can that get the best out of anybody being called an idiot? You see that? They get so angry. What the heck? Get a life, guys, you know? Because that's going to make them behave brilliantly, isn't it? Because they didn't realize that they dropped the ball then. You know, it's interesting, the Belichick sort of coaching mantra, which is more like this. You know, he writes a few notes. That's all he needs to do. By the way, the Patriots won the Super Bowl a few times, just thought I'd mention that. And maybe the Stanley Cup as well. Anyway, so what's interesting is that let's think about what's important in terms of work values and personality traits. When we're hiring, maybe we want to avoid thinking about heroes that talk about themselves all the time, which means I'd never get a job, by the way. But anyway, let's think instead about dynamics of teams and that personality fit. Coaching is fundamental, not just because I don't really like the word coaching, by the way, but you know, teaching is fundamental. Maybe that's a better word. It's sort of more this sort of llama kind of model. You know, Toyota call their managers teachers. Isn't that kind of cool? I kind of like that. Anyway, we've got to help people think about those things, help ourselves think about those things, and encourage the right behaviors. Think about 4 very simple questions. What motivates? What do you expect from others? Do you care about the customer? And tell me about your pride of work. Those things are super, super important. The future is all about teams, ladies and gentlemen. That's the only way we're going to solve all of the great problems that are ahead of us. That's the only way we can raise everybody around the world. Working in complex work requires teams, cross-functional teams. They need inspirational product owners with a clear vision and a little bit of a maniacal focus on that vision. Dare I say a little bit of arrogance there. They need a team of people that can work effectively together, that work in a psychologically safe environment to do that. So think a little bit about personality. Think a little bit about work values. And think about how you could change your behavior to follow that sort of that Buddhist mantra. Change the way that you think about the world. Because if you do, I think you're going to see some amazing results. Now, let's turn this thing really real. Let's talk about Leicester City, the greatest football team ever to grace the planet. Go Foxes, go Foxes. I believe there was somebody that said something about West Ham over there. I'm not going to talk about that. Claret. I mean, what sort of color is that? Eh? Anyway, West Ham. Anyway, Leicester City, the greatest football team. But technically, if football teams were measured by how successful they perhaps weren't the greatest football team. Now, some of you, dare I say the more intelligent members of the audience, may have watched the English Premier League 3 seasons ago and noticed that a team that the starting 11 cost £23 million won the English Premier League. Won it. They beat West Ham, but that wasn't so much of an effort. They beat Chelsea. Man City gave them a good kick-in, actually. Tottenham Hotspur. Arsenal. They beat all of these amazing. In fact, Man United was the most expensive team that year. Their starting 11 was almost £200 million. £200 million. The average wage bill of their star player over the season was more than the entire wage bill of Leicester City. They won the Premier League. There's been a lot written about it, so I'm not going to bore you with that. I could for hours. And by the way, I'm from a little place called Leicester. My dad's a season ticket holder. Apparently, throughout his working life, he used to put £10 on Leicester finishing in the top 3 every year. Then he retired, and Julie, his wife, said, no more £10. It was 5,000 to 1 they won the Premier League. He would have made a significant amount of money. Yeah, he's a happy boy. Anyway, they won it for lots of reasons. They won it because of big data. They won it because of sports science. They won it because of keeping the team healthy. They won it for lots of reasons. But the other reason why they won it is because they were a team. Man United had a lot of better players. They had geezers that could bend the ball. We didn't have any of them. We had one guy, but he wasn't that great. They had defenders that were like 16 feet tall. We didn't have any of that. Our tallest defender was like 4'2". We didn't. That's actually not true. He was a German and he was 6 foot. But anyway, we weren't glamorous, but we cared about each other. So when Leicester City won it, they actually won it not playing because Tottenham played on a Tuesday. It was the end of the season. It might have been a Tuesday, but I think it was a Monday. I was actually teaching a PSF class, which was a disaster. I was like, okay, yeah, that's good. I was watching it. Tottenham were playing. You know what Leicester were doing? They were all around Jamie Vardy's house. Jamie Vardy was a striker, was playing non-league 3 seasons before. They were together. You could see the one thing that they had that the other teams didn't have. They loved each other. Now that's a bit of a yucky word, isn't it? But they loved each other. They cared about each other. When there was an injury, one of the defenders got injured. Jamie Vardy came back. He was defending. They cared. They really cared about each other. Everybody helped each other out. Everybody dropped. It was a team effort. They were a team. They gelled. They connected. And they won the Premier League against all the odds. Go Foxes. Now, that's what happens when you build great teams that work effectively together. But sometimes it's luck. I believe this was a little luck, I'll be honest. But it also can be judgment. The research that we did highlighted some of the characteristics that are important for agile teams and product owners to effectively gel, to work well together, to effectively deliver value. Yes, there's many other characteristics that are important, but if you think about those things or step back a little bit, you can help those teams do that. And you can build a team like Leicester City. And you can go against the odds and build a product that amazes the customers, delivers amazing value, and changes the world. You can do that. It's awesome. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully this has been a little fun. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody too much. I think we've got time for maybe 5 minutes of questions, maybe. Is that okay, Bart, or not? It's totally up to you. Hopefully this was fun. I'm not keeping you from the bar. Any questions, comments, issues, observations? Like, Dave, you've turned into a hippie. I'm so sorry. No? None? Wow, that's not very agile of you, is it? No. Okay, you've all failed. All right, that was good. Columbus is dead to me. No? No? I know, it's a little embarrassing asking questions in front of others, isn't it? I totally understand. Anyway, or maybe you just want to go to the bar, which is totally understandable as well. Have a fantastic event tomorrow. Have a fantastic next year. Hopefully I'm going to come here in 10 years' time, on my Tesla hoverboard or whatever I'm wearing at that moment. And go out and change the world, everybody. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.